I'm going to let the programming mostly speak for itself, but I just want to tell you just really quickly that the Quilt Alliance is was started in 1993 by some women that you probably already know, but maybe didn't know founded the Quilt Alliance. Shelley Ziegert in Kentucky, Nancy O'Brien Puentes, and Carrie Bresnahan. And Nancy and Carrie are the founders and presidents of Quilts Inc., who run Festival, Quilt Market. Three visionary women who set forth to create a museum. At first they envisioned it as a bricks and mortar museum in Washington, D.C. nearby, but realized quickly that not only was the expense and the challenge of doing that really big, but also that not everybody can get to Washington, D.C. You know, not everyone can travel there just physically, but also have the funding to do so. So it quickly became a virtual, the idea became more of a virtual museum. And it really was also started because of the Kentucky Quilt Project and the fact that many states had done quilt documentation projects. And a lot of that documentation was sitting in a garage or a filing cabinet in an office or a storage space doing no one any good. And the folks who had been so gracious to bring their quilts to these documentation days, that work was sort of lost, and no researchers could access it. No quilters like yourselves could be inspired by it. So they began working on the Quilt Index. So if you don't know about the Quilt Index, that's one of your first stops when you get home. Quiltindex.org. 60,000 quilts organized by pattern, color, place of origin, maker, county. There's just a million ways to search and browse this project. But like the Quilt Index and the rest of our projects, Quilters SOS, we're going to demonstrate in 2 different workshops today and go tell it at the Quilt Show, which you'll see demonstrated during Lauren's presentation, are presented virtually, but they are not experienced firsthand virtually. It's a one-to-one sometimes with QSOS, one person volunteering to interview another person, and sometimes transcribe that interview. And Go Tell It at the Quilt Show has been an effort to record quilter stories where they gather, because we figure, oh, we can get one QSOS story by going over to your house and interviewing you. But if I go to Quilt Festival, and I'm Emma Parker, which I'm not as energetic as Emma, but she reported, I think, over 100. What was our final number at Festival this year?
I think 106.
106 in 4 days. That one. Okay, they're 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
But you've been, I mean, how many people have been to Festival? Or any large quilt show? It's crazy. It's like 4 football fields or something of walking back and forth. But Emma walked back and forth so that, because all, you know, so that all the people that couldn't go to Festival could experience those quilts. And we interviewed the Quilters of Mexico, a good number of that group. So like your guild, we're also interested in documenting subgroups within the quilt world. So we should talk about doing that, because that's one of our focuses right now, is trying to figure out how can we find more places where quilters gather and teach and empower them to do their own documentation. I mean, you've done it. You just said nobody else is going to do it. We're going to do our books. Nobody else is going to write our books, so we're going to do it. Well, we feel that way about the history of our community. We've got to do it, and we've got to keep it up to date and keep doing it. So what we're interested in now is hearing from guilds and small groups who would like to have us come and maybe do a day of interviewing with you, or simply teach you over the phone how to do it yourself. But we've got to be ready to receive those documentaries. So all of you who have joined, I want to thank you, and all of you everyone who's, you know, invested in this day. That's where your funds go, is us figuring out how to receive and share that documentation, because we've done a lot of documenting and preserving in the last 21 years that this organization has been going. And now we're in this really focusing on the share. How do we get it out there? Because there's, I said there's 60,000 images of quilts in the Quilt Index. There's thousands, over 1,000 QSOS interviews, but so too few people are using them or know about them. So that's really our focus now. And we're excited to have all our speakers here. I'm going to turn it over to Janniken Smucker, whose name tag says she's a treasurer. Never been the treasurer, ever. I don't know how that happened, but Janniken is actually the secretary and soon to be our new president at our board meeting on Monday. If all goes well. If all goes well, and I make her a new name tag. But thanks everyone. If you have any questions or feedback, I would love to hear it. We'll be sending out an evaluation afterward, but I personally would love to hear it today or this weekend. So let me know.
I would also like to welcome you all here on behalf of the board. We're delighted to have a day where we can really devote it to sharing our projects and talking about our mission, this is really why the organization was founded, why it's still here 20 plus years later. We really do want to record all the stories of all the quilts. So thank you for being here today to help us do that. It's my privilege to introduce my friend and colleague, Maren Hansen, who I have long collaborated with on many quilt projects, and I'm very excited to hear about her current project, which is part of her doctoral studies at the University of Leicester, which she's nearly finished with. We're very proud to know that dissertation will soon be hot off the presses. But this is part of a long line of inquiry that she's had, exploring the connections between quilts and people and cultures, and the way quilts transcend cultures, and how quilts have been shared among cultures. And I think it's a really novel approach she's taken. She has long had an interest in Chinese history, Chinese culture, has visited China many times, and she began to pursue her interest in Chinese patchwork. She realized that there was this amazing connection right here at home to families in the United States. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. If you don't already know Maren, she is the curator of exhibitions at the International Quilt Study Center and Museum at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, which is the world's largest publicly held collection of quilts. And if you haven't had a chance to visit, next time you are heading west out on I-80, pull off, definitely make a stop. It's an amazing building. They've just reopened some new galleries. Maren is responsible for many of the exhibitions that have been hosted in that facility, including the new one that just opened, which is called Getting to Know You, which is sort of a reintroduction to many of the, not just the highlights, but some of the rare gems, the hidden stories in the International Quilt Study Center collection. She's also the author of one of my very favorite books, co-editor and author of much of it, American Quilts in the Modern Age, 1870 to 1940. And many of her articles have appeared in Uncovering, the Journal of the American Quilt Study Group, and also in Textile, the Journal of Cloth and Culture. She is also becoming one of the foremost experts in quilt making traditions around the world. We here in the United States know that we have something special going on, but we do share a quilt making tradition with people in every corner of the globe. And part of Maren's job at the Quilt Center in Nebraska is to discover those traditions and to find those quilts, which is a very enviable job. She gets to travel around the world and find people who will help her travel around the world and discover these hidden quilts. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Maren Hansen.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be surrounded by good friends. Thank you very much for that introduction, Janniken. So, good morning.
Good morning.
I am honored to join you all here at the Not Fade Away conference, speaking about my absolute favorite quilt-related topic. And please forgive me for playing the cute card so early on with this photograph of these two young ladies who just so happen to be with us today. But at its heart, they represent what this topic is all about. I'm here to share with you the story of 100 Good Wishes quilts. But before we start down that path, I would just like to ask, how do you welcome a new child into your family? Would anyone like to jump up and proclaim, I make a quilt?
I do.
Yes, because that's exactly the answer I'm looking for. And just to get this embarrassing stuff out of the way right now, these are all quilts I've made for the babies of friends and family members. I seem to have a thing for really big triangles and minimal quilting and repeating fabrics, but we don't really need to critique my techniques or fabric, I hope. Because the impulse to make something to welcome a new child was clearly there. I'll give myself that much. And not to make just anything, but a quilt. We all know what feelings, what connotations emerge when we think of quilts. In fact, there's an interesting component to our museum's World Quilts, the American Story website, where visitors to the site can submit their own answer to the question, what do you think quilts are? These thoughts are then displayed in a word cloud like you see here. And so many of people's ideas about quilts have to do with warmth, comfort, welcoming, communities, connections. And also, let's not forget that we're sitting in a building right now full of quilts that embody many of these same notions. There's a room full of sacred threads right upstairs, so please go view them if you haven't already had a chance. So emotion and human connection are intimate aspects of quilts and quilt making that I dare say all of us immediately recognize. Returning to the idea of making quilts for babies and children, these days we have so many options. We can hop on, sacred threads, forgot that I added that in. So yes, please go upstairs and see them. We can hop on Pinterest and get ideas for patterns, or we could go to Craftsy and take a class, or if we're really strapped for time, there we go. Or if all we can do is make quilts with big triangles, like some of us, we can visit Etsy and buy one from a professional quilt maker. Again, the basic impulse is there. Warmth, comfort, connection. In other words, let's welcome this new child to her family. Although I just mentioned three of the most popular online and therefore contemporary sources for quilts and quilt patterns, making quilts for children has been around for a long time. Here's just a sampling of the International Quilt Study Center and Museum's crib quilts. These all happen to be from the early 20th century and range from a sweet outline embroidery quilt at the bottom. It's a little out of focus, but this one down here has some of those sweet little outline embroidery patches that were so popular in the early 20th century, to a sort of a folk-arty bird's quilt up here. I'm not really sure if they're sitting on a branch. It's very, as I say, folk-arty, but very, very quirky and endearing. To a Midwestern Amish piece down here, to the one in the upper right, and you can't appreciate the quilting on this one from this image, but it has an incredible 12 to 17 quilting stitches per inch. So that was one lucky baby. And pulling the focus out a bit, there we go. Making quilts to commemorate important events, both public and private, is an integral part of the American quilt story. Here again, I'm getting a plug-in for our website, World Quilts, the American Story. You can see we have a whole section devoted to commemoration, and this is a little bit washed out here. I think our projector sort of, we're losing some of the text there, but you can see there's a whole section on commemoration here. And in this section, we talk about historical movements like temperance, as well as ongoing issues like war and peace, all of which have inspired people to make quilts over the years. So these are quilt styles and practices with which many of us are already familiar, but I want to pull the focus out even further and talk briefly about patchwork and quilting traditions in other parts of the world, traditions specifically devoted to children. In past times and in parts of the world where access to modern healthcare is limited, children have had tragically high mortality rates. In some cultures, parents attempt to ward off ill health, evil spirits, or bad luck by surrounding their children with talismans. Often these protective charms are fabric, taking the form of clothing or bedding. In Gujarat, India, for instance, women make special quilts that can be folded and used as an enveloping cradle. And you can see one of them on display or in the back of this, behind this woman as she's working on a quilt. And this is one of the quilts here, and you can see it has little loops at the corners in order to fold it and then use it as a cradle. And they cover these godiyun, as they are called, in auspicious symbols. They also make little caps or hoods for their young ones to wear, often covered in shisha or mirror work, which is believed to reflect away the evil eye. So it's a beautiful little cap over there on the right. And in Central Asia, especially Turkmenistan, patchwork clothing, like these tunics or kurta, is used for the same purpose. The wide array of fabrics and colors, and the repeating triangles in particular, are believed to confuse or scare away malicious spirits. And note that the bottoms of the garments are left unfinished. This is done in the belief that if you finish them, the child will stop growing. And these adorable little, they're called kirlik, or ponchos, serve the same purpose as the kurta I just showed. And in case you were thinking, how novel to put babies in specially crafted, spiritually protective clothing, I'd like to share this image with you. Seems to not be. There we go. Sorry, I sort of ruined my own punchline there, but I'd like to share this image with you because really, christening gowns are roughly in the same category, right? They play a critical role in a protective family tradition within a specific religious context. They represent the commitment that the family and godparents are making to safeguard the child from all harm, much in the same way the patchwork kurta safeguards a Turkmen child. But mostly I wanted to be able to share the royal family with you so that we could collectively bask in their current moment of popularity. We all love Charlotte, right? There we go. Okay, so now I want to finally bring us around to the region of the world most relevant to our topic, 100 Good Wishes quilts, and that's China. Here are some contemporary children from the Dong ethnic minority in south-central China wearing patchwork clothing. As with other parts of the world, in China, patchwork is thought to protect children from ghosts and evil spirits. And this isn't solely a folk tradition. Wealthier aristocratic families, at least in the past, also subscribed to the belief that patchwork was talismanic. This well-known historical garment, known as the Baijia, which means literally 100 families' robe, was likely made by all classes of people, but only the ones made by the wealthy have survived from past eras. Here we go. So I've discovered examples in museum and private collections all over the world. And this is just a sampling of the ones I've found. And the most recent one I found was in the city of Shaoxing. And if any of you are familiar with Chinese literature, the most famous 20th century Chinese author was Lu Xun, and this was actually his Baijia, and it's in the museum devoted to him in the city of Shaoxing. And this elaborately embroidered version shows how the wealthier or aristocratic Chinese interpreted the style. The baijiayi robe is composed of hundreds of patches. I've seen repeating squares, rectangles, triangles, diamonds, and hexagons. It is often embroidered with auspicious symbols and motifs, such as the bagua, which is the 8-sided representation of the Taoist trigrams with the yin and yang in the middle, the 12 symbols of the zodiac, and other culturally potent symbols and images from mythology and folktales. It makes sense then that the robes were made as spiritually protective garments, particularly for male children, who were generally more valued for the fact that they would carry on the family name and would care for their parents as they aged. And here are some of those young males, perhaps frolicking in the knowledge of their favorite status, depicted wearing these baijiayi patchwork robes. The baijiayi tradition also reportedly had a community-based aspect to it as well. It is said that the custom was to present the mother of a young boy with small pieces of silk and embroidery for her to sew together to make the child a jacket, all those contributing thus joining in to wish the child good fortune and protection from evil. There also seems to have been a rarer offshoot of the baijiayi that took the form of a bed cover. These objects are largely undocumented, but I was lucky enough to be present when the director of the Xi'an Jiaotong University Art Museum in Xi'an, China, presented our museum with this small patchwork quilt, which had been made 30 years earlier in the Chinese province of Gansu by a mother for her young son. Sometimes these textiles are called baijiabei, or 100 families quilts. You can note, I'm sure, the similarity to the patchwork robe's name, which also has the phrase 100 families in it. So I'm going to take a brief detour here to explain some terms. And there will be a quiz at the end. I'm going to be teaching you some Chinese, and we'll have a little quiz to make sure it's absorbed. As I said, in Mandarin Chinese, baijiabei literally means 100 families quilt. Colloquially, however, the phrase can be used more loosely. The term baijia often simply means many people. It doesn't necessarily literally mean 100, it just means many people, as in a many people quilt. Although patchwork has undoubtedly been made in China from donated fabrics, it's likely that most people use the baijiabei phrase to simply describe the scrappy or patchwork nature of a textile. Thanks, Emma. So I've had many conversations with Chinese people who are familiar with the baijiabei concept and talk about it as a localized practice centered on a few areas in northern China. But a recent conversation with a Chinese ethnographer confirmed for me that in contemporary China anyway, the term generically refers to patchwork-style textiles. And that brings me to these items. All right. Oh, wow. I think it maybe is like slow, and so it's sort of catching up as I keep clicking, so I need to be more patient. That brings me to these items. Has anybody here been to China? I know several of you have, yes. So, for those of you who have, especially if you were in the north, I'm willing to bet that you saw some of these patchwork items being sold at nearly every tourist location. You just raise your hand if you've seen something like this. Yeah, a few of you. Okay, great. The first ones I ever saw were in 1992, being hawked by vendors wandering up and down the Great Wall. At the time, I didn't know what they were called, though that didn't stop me from buying about half a dozen. But on a recent research trip to northwest China, my colleagues and I met craftswomen who were calling them baijiabei and baijiayi if they were making a robe, but this woman called this a baijiabei. So these pieces are constructed entirely from new rather than donated fabrics, And similarly, the 30-year-old Baijiabe I just showed you a minute ago also appears to have been constructed from a limited number of fabrics, not the range that you would expect from literally 100 or even many families. Therefore, it does seem likely that the 100 families component serves primarily as a metaphor for the varied fabrics used in the quilt's construction. However, in no way does that take away from the spirit of the object. The idea, I believe, of community is embedded in it regardless. Okay, so this was a long way to get here. I've got two separate parallel streams going. Spiritually protective and community-based clothing and quilts for children in both Eastern and Western contexts. But where am I headed with all of this?